An administrative error sent her to the deadliest academy in the galaxy, and she simply smiled. The stamp was wrong. I knew it before I finished reading the line. 14 months of filing other people's futures, and I could read an assignment code the way some people read weather. The letters burned off the screen at me like something that had been waiting to happen. Voth Kral Military Academy, Sector 9, Classification, Death Tier. I set my coffee down. My name is Nadia Osaimensa. I am 23 years old. I grew up on Way Station Kofi 7, a mid-tier trade platform orbiting nothing interesting, where my mother spent 31 years processing interstellar documentation for the Interstellar Educational Placement Bureau. I took her desk when she retired. Not her job, technically. Her actual desk. She left a small dent in the armrest from pressing her elbow into it for 3 decades, and I fit into that dent like a key into a lock. I had applied 14 months ago for the Kelvari Diplomatic Correspondence Academy. Pleasant Moon, 94% pass rate, excellent coffee from a species that had been cultivating beans for 600 years, a program that trained interstellar administrative liaisons, which is the closest the galaxy gets to what I already was. My application had been sitting in a routing queue this whole time. And now it had come back stamped wrong. I pulled up the correction form. Form 77C Routing Error, Educational Placement, Standard Procedure. I had processed over 2,000 of these. I scrolled to the counter-signature requirements. 3 departments, 2 of which had merged into a single office 8 months ago under Directive 14F, meaning they technically no longer existed as separate entities, meaning any signatures obtained from their former staff would require retroactive validation through the Bureau's legacy authentication system, which had been offline since a software migration in the spring and had a current backlog of 412 pending cases. I closed the form. The timeline on a legitimate correction, processed correctly with no errors, somewhere between 16 and 22 months. I was due to report to Voth Kral in 19 days. I opened my calendar, booked transport, Sector 9 departure, single occupancy. Then I pulled up Form 3B, change of permanent residential address, and updated my filing address to the Voth Kral dormitory system, because if I was going, my paperwork was going correctly. My coworker Parvesh leaned over from the next cubicle. He was the only other human on our floor. He was the kind of person who brought homemade food on Fridays and remembered everyone's birthday, and he had been mildly horrified by me since the day we met in a way that suggested he found me both admirable and unsettling. "Did your assignment come through?" he asked. "It did. Kelvari." I turned my screen toward him. He looked at it for a long moment. His face moved through several stages. "Nadia, that's Voth Kral." "I know. That's the Death Tier Academy, the one that sends casualty reports to next of kin as a standard intake procedure. They also send them a pre-filled emergency contact update form, which I actually think is quite thoughtful. You need to fight this. You need to file immediately. The correction form requires signatures from 2 departments that no longer exist. Then escalate, go above the Bureau, contact the Sector Educational Authority." I thought about that. I genuinely did. I sat with it for several seconds, which for me is a long time. The Sector Educational Authority had a response window of 30 business days. Voth Kral's enrollment lock-in triggered at day 12. If I missed enrollment, my application slot voided entirely, which meant reapplying from scratch, which meant another 14 months in the queue, which meant another 14 months at this desk, in this dent, under these lights. I was not afraid of this desk. I had grown up watching my mother build something real from behind one just like it. But I had also grown up watching her press her elbow into that armrest every day for 31 years, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided something once and never undecided it. I had decided something too. I just had not expected the galaxy to hand me quite this particular version of it. "I'll be fine," I said. Parvesh looked at me, The way people look at someone standing calmly at the edge of something very high. How, he said, not a question, just a word. I read forms for a living, I said. That place runs on systems. Systems have documentation. Documentation has gaps. I picked up my coffee. I've been reading gaps my whole career. He did not look reassured. He looked like a man watching a slow-motion situation unfold that he had no tools to stop. I finished my shift. I went home. I packed one bag, my bureau-issue document kit, and a folder of blank forms I had printed from the Galactic Administrative Registry. Every standard form I thought I might conceivably need, organized by category, cross-referenced and tabbed. Parvesh would have found this either impressive or worrying. Probably both. The transport bay on Kofi 7 smelled like recycled air and ion fuel. The ship assigned to Sector 9 was a mid-range military transport, which meant it was large, efficient, and stripped of anything that could be considered comfort. The other passengers were already boarded when I arrived. I had known, intellectually, that I would not be the only cadet on this transport. I had not fully processed what that would look like. There were 14 of them, all non-human, all large. The Drekari contingent took up one entire side of the cabin, 3 of them, wrapped in layered scar tissue that other Drekari apparently applied in ceremonial bonding rites I had read about once in a species relations memo, and then filed under things that are not my business. The Sethkai candidates sat in a cluster near the back. I had also read about them. Their culture sent the candidates who had already failed a first trial to Voth Krau, the ones their tradition considered living debts, existing on borrowed spiritual time. They had a particular quality of stillness that was not peace. It was something else, something that had burned all the way through panic and come out the other side as quiet. I recognized it actually. Every eye in the cabin found me the moment I stepped through the hatch. It was the kind of attention that is not curiosity. It is assessment. They were reading me the way I had just read my assignment stamp, looking for the category, the classification, the threat level. I walked to an open seat, stowed my bag, and sat down. Across from me, the largest of the Drekari watched me without moving. 7 feet of engineered durability, bonding scars running from jaw to collarbone in patterns that meant things I was not qualified to interpret. His eyes were the pale gold of old warning signs. I pulled out Form 3B, change of residential address, and began filling in the dormitory details. He watched me write. I wrote. The ship lifted. The station fell away. The stars outside the porthole rearranged into something unfamiliar. I finished the form, capped my pen, and tucked it back into the folder. The Drekari was still watching me. I looked up and met his gaze, which is something most species apparently do not do with Drekari on a first meeting. I did not know this at the time. I found out later that it registers in their culture as either supreme confidence or a total absence of functioning self-preservation instinct. He smiled. Not warmly, not meanly, just a recognition of something. I looked back down at my folder and opened the next form. 19 days. I had a lot of reading to do. The first thing Voth Krau does is make you stand in a field for 3 hours. No explanation, no instruction. They process your intake documents, which I had submitted 14 days early and in triplicate, earning a look from the intake officer that I cannot fully describe except to say it seemed to cause him minor distress. And then they walk you out to a flat gray field under a sky the color of old bruises and leave you there. Some cadets paced. The Sethkai stood like carved stone. 2 of the Drekari from my transport sat cross-legged and went somewhere internal that I did not have access to. The Kelvari cadet near me, short, narrow, with the look of someone who had also clearly arrived here by mistake, kept checking a communicator that had no signal. I sat on the ground and read. Not dramatically. I had brought the Voth Krau Facility Operations Manual, which was public record, available through the Bureau's Educational Procurement Database, and had not, as far as I could tell, been read by anyone in the past decade. 740 pages. I had printed the relevant sections and organized them into a subfolder labeled Sector 9, Operational Reference. By the time Commandant Vekos arrived, I was on page 212. Vekos was Sethkai, which meant he was old in a way that did not look like age, it looked like compression. Like something that had been through enormous pressure and come out smaller, denser, and absolutely certain of itself. 6 limbs. Scar patterns that did not follow any cultural logic I had read about, which meant they were personal. He moved across the field like he owned the gravity. He stood at the front of the assembled cohort and looked at us for a long time without speaking. Then he read the names. 17 of them, last year's casualties, cadets who had not completed the program. He read each name in the species' native pronunciation, slowly, with full phonetic weight, and the field was absolutely silent except for his voice and the wind. This was tradition. I had read about it. The purpose was psychological. The first cull happened before a single physical trial was run. Several candidates dropped enrollment every year during this address. The Academy's documentation recorded it as voluntary withdrawal. I kept my pen moving. I had identified 3 things during his speech. The first, Exercise 7's terrain parameters based on the facility map created a predictable bottleneck that the safety protocols did not adequately account for. The second, the casualty distribution across the 17 names skewed heavily toward Week 2, specifically days 9 through 11, which correlated with a weather pattern documented in the facility's environmental records from the past 40 years. The third, the cadet to my left was going to pass out if he did not sit down. I caught his elbow before he went down. He was the Kelvari from the field. Up close, his species had very large eyes and a slight translucency to the skin above the collarbone that deepened when they were in distress. He was deeply translucent. "Breathe," I said quietly. "I am breathing," he whispered back. "Breathe differently." He did, it helped marginally. "I'm Owen," he said, Kelvari name, Earth pronunciation, which meant someone in his family had married human or lived near humans long enough that human names had become comfortable. Owen Marsh. "Nadia Osimensa," I said. "You filed your enrollment form incorrectly." He stared at me. "How do you know that?" "You're here, aren't you?" I said, "same as me." Something moved across his face. Recognition. The specific relief of finding someone else in a room who is also lost. Commandant Vekos finished the names and looked up at the cohort. His eyes moved across the assembled cadets the way a quality control scanner moves across a production line. They stopped on me. "Cadet," his voice carried without effort, "you are writing." "Yes, sir." "During the memorial address." "I can do both, sir." A silence of the variety that usually precedes consequences. "What are you writing?" "An internal memo," I said, "regarding the liability exposure on Exercise 7. The terrain configuration creates a decision bottleneck at approximately the 3rd kilometer that your current safety protocol doesn't address. I thought the facility's management team might want to review it." The field was very quiet. Vekos looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that is not yet a verdict. It is an assessment with the outcome still genuinely open. "You are the human," he said. "Yes, sir." "The bureau placement." He said it without inflection. I had no idea yet what that meant to him. "Yes, sir." He looked at my notes, then at me. Then he turned and addressed the rest of the cohort, and I filed my memo in the subfolder and kept reading. The Drekari from the transport, I learned his name was Vors, had watched the entire exchange from 3 meters away. During the physical assessment that followed, when cadets were run through a series of trials designed to establish baseline capability scores, Vors watched me the way scientists watch experiments, with detachment that is actually intense attention. My scores came back mixed, bottom 3rd in direct physical engagement, middle range in terrain navigation, top 15% in resource identification, which surprised the scoring officer enough that she ran my results twice. And then a 4th category, which the system processed for 11 seconds before returning an error code. The scoring officer stared at her screen. "What does that mean?" she asked, not to me specifically, but I answered anyway. "It's a legacy field," I said. "From the pre-unification military assessment rubric, logistical threat analysis. The category measures a candidate's ability to identify systemic vulnerabilities in operational environments. It hasn't been used in about 200 years, but the form still carries the field because no one updated the template." She looked at me. "I used to process old academy intake forms," I said. "I recognize the scoring parameters." She printed my results, walked them personally to Commandant Vekos's office. He summoned me that evening. His office was bare in the way that is a choice, not because he lacked things, but because he had decided long ago that things were weight and he traveled light. One desk, one lamp, a small framed document on the wall that I identified on second glance as an original treaty certificate, 300 years old, framed without glass because he wanted it to breathe. He held my results without looking at them. "No one has scored in the logistical threat analysis field in 2 centuries, he said. "Someone probably should have fixed the form," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think like an administrator." I waited to hear whether this was a compliment. "At Voth Kral," he said, "we have produced warriors, tacticians, intelligence operatives, and 2 sitting Galactic Council members. We have not, in 900 years of operation, produced an administrator." "I'm not sure that's accurate, sir," I said carefully. "I reviewed your alumni records. Graduate Keth Varos, class of 412, went on to reorganize the Drekari supply chain infrastructure and effectively ended a 14-year resource conflict without a single engagement. That's administrative work." He looked at me, full unguarded sharp. "Everyone else," he said slowly, "is afraid of this place." "Oh, I'm afraid," I said. "I'm just more interested." He sent me back to the dormitory without another word. Vors was leaning against the wall outside, arms crossed, waiting. I did not know yet that this was unusual. I learned later that Drekari did not wait for people. They arrived. The act of waiting was a statement. "What did he say?" Vors asked. "He noted that the Academy has not produced an administrator in 900 years. "What did you say?" I pointed out that was not entirely accurate. Vors looked at me with the expression I would come to recognize over the following weeks as the closest he got to delighted. He pushed off the wall and walked beside me back to the dormitories, and I thought that for a place I was not supposed to be, it had very good lighting in the corridors, and the form I needed to file about Exercise 7 was coming together quite clearly in my head, and the wrong stars outside the window looked, if I was being honest with myself, absolutely extraordinary. On day 8 I met my team, and on day 9 I decided we were going to be fine. Not because they were impressive. They were not on paper. My team assignment came through a standard cohort distribution algorithm that, I suspected, had been quietly weighted to sort the cadets no one else had claimed. The system produced us like a remainder. Owen Marsh, the Kelvari with the large eyes and the wrong enrollment form, who I had already established a functional relationship with based entirely on shared bureaucratic misfortune. Orath, a Drekari female who had been placed in my team as a disciplinary measure. She had, in the first week, restructured her bunk assignment without authorization, reassigned 3 equipment lockers, and submitted a complaint about the nutritional allocation formula that was, by all accounts, entirely correct and therefore more inconvenient than the original problem. And a Sethkai cadet named Resk, quiet in the manner of his people, who carried a personal tally of some kind on a worn strip of fabric around one wrist and never explained it. I called our first meeting like it was a quarterly review. I brought a printed agenda. Orath looked at it. "You printed an agenda for a survival team meeting." "I also brought a copy for each of you," I said, distributing them. "Section 1 is team capability mapping. Section 2 is resource inventory. Section 3 is my preliminary analysis of the trial parameters." Owen was already reading his copy. Resk took his without looking at it and folded it very precisely into thirds. Orath stared at hers. "Humans are strange," she said, but she was reading it. The trial launched on day 12. The brief was simple on the surface. Survive 72 hours in a designated biome, extract an encoded data package from a fixed location, return. The complexity was in the environment, which had been specifically engineered to present layered, escalating hazards. Every year, cadets who sprinted for the objective lost people in the first 6 hours. I did not sprint. I had read the biome construction tender document, which was 3 years old and filed under Sector 9 procurement in the Bureau's public infrastructure database. I had my Bureau access code. I had 12 nights of reading time. I knew the contractor, the installation timeline, the maintenance schedule, and the bypass codes assigned to each automated hazard system for servicing purposes. I also knew which hazards the document had not mentioned, because the gaps in a construction tender are as informative as the contents. "We walk," I told my team at the boundary line. Around us, every other cohort was already moving fast, already spreading into the terrain with the efficient urgency of people who had trained their whole lives for exactly this. "We walk," Owen said. "We walk specific route, I'll direct." Orath looked at the sprinting cadets, looked at me. The expression on her face was the very specific one of someone who has been insubordinate before and is currently calculating whether this is the right time for it again. "Why?" she said. "Because the fastest path goes through a motion-triggered compression zone at the 2-kilometer mark, a thermal hazard corridor at 4 kilometers, and a structural instability in the terrain at the river crossing that the safety review flagged 18 months ago and no one has repaired yet." I showed her the page. "If we go around all 3, we add 40 minutes to our time. If we go through any one of them, we add approximately everything." She took the page, read it. She started walking. We went around the first hazard zone without incident. A distant sound from the direction the other teams had gone told us what we needed to know. We kept walking. The second zone I navigated by a combination of the tender document and the environmental readings Owen was quietly pulling from a portable scanner he had brought, not standard issue, personal equipment, something he'd built during his previous academic life in a way that probably violated 2 procurement policies and which I had chosen not to acknowledge in writing. The third zone was the one I could not walk around. It sat directly between us and the extraction point, a wide stretch of terrain that the documentation described in careful, minimal language as a restricted interaction zone. 3 paragraphs of safety text. No bypass route indicated. No maintenance window listed. Which meant it had one. The facilities management team had to be able to access the extraction point for resets between trials. There was a route. There was always a route. The people who built systems always left themselves a way back in. I sat down cross-legged in front of the zone's edge and opened my document kit. Resk looked at the terrain ahead, then at me. "You are sitting down." "I'm filing a hazardous conditions report," I said. "Form 44B, I need a witness signature. Orath, if you don't mind." "You are filing a form," Orath said, "in the middle of the trial. The form establishes that we identified a safety hazard and documented it properly before proceeding. If anything goes wrong, it protects the team from negligence classification." I kept writing. "Also, it's giving me time to think." Orath signed the form. I set it aside and looked at the zone's edge. There was a small panel, partially overgrown, at the base of a marker post. I had seen one like it in the tender document's installation schematic. Maintenance access panel, standard across all automated hazard systems in the facility. I walked over and opened it. A keypad. Legacy system, the older numeric format, not biometric. Maintenance bypass codes for systems installed under that contractor's framework followed a consistent pattern. I had cross-referenced it from 3 other public facility documents filed within the same period. The pattern was an administrative convenience. Nobody had changed it because nobody who had access to all three documents had ever had reason to. I entered the code. The zone deactivated. Clean, immediate. The indicator lights on the marker post shifted from red to a steady, blameless amber. Behind me, no one spoke. I turned around. Oreth's expression had moved into new territory, somewhere past skeptical and past surprised and into something that, in her species, I would later learn was closest to the word formidable, said not of oneself, but about someone else. Owen looked like a man who had just watched someone do something with a paperclip that should have required heavy equipment. Resk unwrapped the fabric strip from his wrist, looked at his tally for a moment, and rewrapped it one loop tighter. Forms, I said. Always read the forms. We crossed. We extracted the data package without further incident. It was in a standard waterproof case, locked with a 3-digit code, which I had noted in the original trial design document was always set to the filing date of the trial authorization form. I had the filing date. I had read the authorization form on day 2. I had written the date in my folder under things that might be useful. We came back first. Not by a small margin, by 2 hours and 14 minutes. Commandant Vekos was standing at the return boundary. He did not appear surprised. He appeared, if anything, like someone confirming a calculation he had already run. Other teams came back through the rest of the day. 2 did not come back at all, which meant evacuation protocols and medical response, and a wait over the whole facility for the rest of the afternoon. I sat and wrote up my full incident analysis and filed it through the maintenance reporting system before dinner, complete with the tender document citation and a recommendation for immediate review of the bypass code management protocol. That evening, I went outside alone. The sky over Vothkral was a particular shade of dark that Earth skis never reached, too much atmosphere, too little cloud cover, all the stars wrong and too bright, and in formations that had no names I grew up with. I stood there for a moment, just on the threshold of the return boundary, just inside the lights. I thought about my mother's desk, the dent in the armrest, 31 years of pressing an elbow into the same spot until the material gave way to fit her shape. I thought, I am not supposed to be here. And then immediately after, with the quiet certainty of something I had known for a while but not yet said out loud, neither was she at first. She had been rooted wrong too. A clerical error in her first posting, 29 years ago, had sent her to Kofi 7 instead of the central hub position she had applied for. She had stayed, built something, raised me in the margins of it. I crossed back over the boundary line and went inside. Tomorrow there would be more trials, more forms, more gaps in systems that no one had thought to close because no one had thought to look. I was very good at looking. By week 4, 3 different factions wanted something from me, and I had given exactly none of them what they asked for. The Drekari contingent, led by Vors, wanted me aligned with their bloc. They had a specific concept of coalition in their culture, bonded units that moved as one force, and they had decided, through whatever internal calculus Drekari used, that I was a tactical asset worth acquiring. Vors did not say this directly. He said it through proximity, through the way he consistently positioned himself at my shoulder in shared spaces, through the way other Drekari cadets stopped challenging my presence after a conversation I was not part of. I acknowledged all of this and remained unaligned. The Academy administration wanted me reclassified. I had, over 4 weeks, submitted 11 internal memos, corrected 2 active safety protocols through the official reporting channel, identified a payroll coding error that had been misfiling maintenance staff wages for 6 years, and reorganized the equipment issue room's filing system in a single afternoon, because I could not find what I needed, and the existing system was indefensible. Captain Veth, the administrative liaison, had begun responding to my memos with the expression of a person who respected and resented me in equal proportion. The third faction I did not have a name for yet. I noticed them the way I notice most things, through documentation. A Form 9R Personnel Access Review had been filed on my intake record. Standard form. Unremarkable. Except I knew who had access to file that form, and the signatory code traced back to an oversight body called the Veth Conclave, which I had found mentioned in a border treaty appendix and nowhere else in my previous reading. I filed the discovery in a subfolder labeled Interesting Problems and kept moving. My team had settled into a functional rhythm. Owen had stopped almost passing out in response to stress, which was progress. Oreth had submitted 3 more unauthorized facility reorganizations and received 3 more disciplinary notations, all of which she wore like medals. Resk had said, across 4 weeks, approximately 40 words to me directly, but he had started moving to my side during group drills without being asked, which in Sethkai terms I was fairly certain was a declaration of something significant. Vors joined our training sessions on day 22, also without being asked. By day 25 he was arriving first. I did not have a word for what we were becoming. The Academy's cohort documentation would have called it a unit. I thought of it more as a set of people who had all, in various ways, ended up somewhere unexpected and had collectively decided to be extremely competent about it. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. I had requested access to my own intake file, Standard Form 6A, Personnel Record Review. Any enrolled cadet was entitled, because I wanted to confirm the Form 77C correction status and ensure the original routing error was documented correctly for my own records. The file came back with a flag I had not expected. Not an error flag, a priority flag. Old designation, legacy code, the kind that appears in files that have been touched by someone with clearance I did not have. The flag had a timestamp from 15 months ago, before I had submitted my own application, before I had known I would apply to any academy at all. I sat with that for a moment. 15 months ago, someone had flagged my application slot before I filed it, had effectively reserved the routing error, had made the calculation that I would apply, and that when I did, the Form 77C correction pathway would be blocked, and that I would, when faced with the choice between fighting the system and going where it sent me, choose to go. Someone had read me before I had read them. I closed the file, opened Form 55A, Internal Routing Irregularity Disclosure. This was a whistleblower-adjacent form, the type that creates a formal record of administrative malfeasance in placement systems. I had never filed one. I had processed dozens. I knew exactly how long the investigation timeline was, who reviewed it, and what institutional protections it triggered. I filled it out carefully, correctly, all fields, no blanks. I filed it. Then I went to dinner, because the thing was done and the filing would take the time it took, and in the meantime there were more important problems in motion. Captain Veth found me the following morning. She did not summon me this time. She came to the training yard, which meant it was urgent enough that formality had given way to efficiency, which meant it was genuinely serious. "Sit down," she said. I sat. "What I am about to tell you is classified at a level above your current clearance. I am telling you anyway because the timeline does not allow for a proper clearance escalation, and because you have a Form 55A pending review that is about to become significantly more relevant than you intended." I waited. "The Veth Conclave," she said, "has filed a motion to decommission Voth Krau." I had heard of the Veth Conclave. I had, since finding the personnel access flag, read everything publicly available about them. Old money, old influence, a deliberate institutional obscurity that was itself a kind of power. They did not move loudly. They moved through documentation. "They're using the Raval Charter," Veth continued, "an obscure provision in the original Academy founding treaty. It allows an oversight body to file for decommission on grounds of systemic mission deviation, if supported by a specific administrative argument." I knew about the Raval Charter. It was in the Facility Operations Manual, Chapter 44. I had flagged it as interesting and moved on. "The motion is procedurally valid," she said. Our legal team has reviewed it. There is one available counter. One. I already felt where this was going. The particular way that things fall into place when you have read enough of the same document from enough different angles. The Charter's challenge provision, I said. A challenge to a decommission motion can only be filed by a currently enrolled cadet from a signatory species of the original founding treaty. Veth looked at me. Earth signed that treaty, I said. 17 years ago, at a clerical summit. By accident. The signatures are legally binding regardless of intent. Her voice was very level. You are the only human currently enrolled at Voth Crow. I thought about the priority flag on my intake file. The clearance timestamp 15 months before my application. Someone had read me correctly, from a long distance, and made a bet on what I would do when the system sent me somewhere I was not supposed to go. Who flagged my file? I asked. Veth looked at the wall for a moment, then Commandant Vekos. I absorbed that. 17 years ago, I said, when Earth signed the Rival Charter, he was present. He signed it with them, as the Academy's representative. So he had known, for 17 years, that the signing was accidental, and therefore that Earth had no representative capable of exercising the challenge provision. And he had read my application, one ordinary human woman applying for a correspondence academy, and had looked for the logistical threat analysis score before he had any data suggesting I would produce one. He had looked for it because he needed it to be there. He had bet on me, on a form, on a gap in my records that no one else would have thought to look at. The thing I felt was complicated, not quite betrayal because it had not hurt me, not quite gratitude because I had not asked, something in between which I did not have a clean word for and which I therefore set aside to be processed at a later time. When is the tribunal hearing? I asked. 12 days. I opened my document kit, found the Rival Charter section I had printed from Chapter 44. Read the challenge provision again, specifically, carefully, with the attention of someone reading the instructions on the only tool available to solve a very particular problem. I'll need access to the full conclave filing, I said. Every document, every form, everything they submitted. Veth looked at me carefully. They have an entire legal team, generations of institutional knowledge. This is what they do. I know, I said, but they filed the forms. I smoothed my printed copy on the table, and I read forms. I went to find Vors and Owen and Orath and Resk, because the kind of work ahead of me was not the kind done alone, and because 12 days was both not very long and, given everything, exactly enough. The tribunal hall on the Galactic Administrative Authority Station was everything official spaces aspired to be and mostly were not. It was enormous without being wasteful, designed to make every occupant feel simultaneously significant and very small. The ceiling was a continuous arc of translucent material that showed open space above stars, real ones, unhurried, and the seating curved outward from the central floor in 3 tiers, all of them full. 3,000 observers. I had not expected 3,000 observers. Owen said, very quietly, standing beside me at the entrance, "That's a lot of people." "Yes," I said. "Are you all right?" "I read the room specifications in the facility guide," I said. "This is exactly what the capacity looks like in practice. I've imagined it approximately correctly." "That is not what I asked." I looked at him. He had a quality I appreciated, which was that he asked what he meant and not something softer. "I am fine," I said. "I am also not entirely fine. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I have enough room for both." He nodded, fell into step beside me. Vors was on my other side. He had insisted on attending in a personal capacity, which in Drekari terms was a declaration that his reputation was formally attached to the outcome. I had told him he did not need to do that. He had looked at me with the expression he reserved for things I said that he found both sensible and entirely beside the point. Orath was somewhere in the observer tier. Resk was beside her. I had asked them to come without explaining why exactly, and they had come without asking, which was its own kind of answer. We crossed the floor to our table. The Veth Conclave's legal team was already seated. 42 individuals, a figure I had confirmed from the registered appearance documents they had filed with the tribunal. They were dressed in the formal overlay robes of their institution, deep blue with silver administrative thread, and they arranged themselves with the particular ease of people who had done this many times in rooms like this one. Their lead advocate was a Drekari elder. Elder in the Drekari sense, which meant ancient and essentially architectural. His name was Advocate Sorveth, and he had litigated before this tribunal for 60 years. I set my binder on the table. My binder was the kind a student carries. Practical, slightly worn, organized with color-coded tabs. It looked, next to the conclave's presentation setup, the way a very good letter looks next to a monument. Vors sat. Owen sat. I remained standing for a moment longer, looking at the room, at the space, at the ceiling full of stars. I thought of my mother's desk. I thought of Form 77C, the form that had sent me here, the blocked correction pathway, the 17 months of routing error that had been built like a road. I thought of Commandant Vekos, who had read an application from an ordinary human woman and bet on a score that barely existed in a field that hadn't been assessed in 200 years, because he needed someone who read gaps, and I was the only one he had. I sat down. Chief Arbiter Melling called the hearing to order. She was Kelvari, elderly, with the patient precision of someone who had presided over so many proceedings that language itself moved more slowly around her. She outlined the nature of the motion, the grounds, the applicable charter provisions, and the challenge right being exercised. The Veth Conclave will present its motion, she said. Advocate Sorveth. He rose. 60 years of tribunal practice moved through his first sentence like a current through water, inevitable, precise, carrying everything with it. He argued the conclave's position in 3 parts. First, that Voth Kral's original founding mandate specified a military development function that had demonstrably shifted toward intelligence and administrative training in recent cohort compositions. Second, that this shift constituted mission deviation under Charter Provision 7C. Third, that the Academy's current operational model exposed the sector to strategic risk that the conclave, as designated oversight body, was obligated to address. He argued for 47 minutes. It was genuinely well constructed. I did not allow myself to be unmoved by it simply because I was opposing it. Good work deserved recognition even when it was inconvenient. Every argument was sourced. Every precedent was cited. Every form reference was accurate. Almost, he concluded, turned to face me with the full weight of 60 years settling behind his eyes. The cadet, he said, will concede. She has been outmatched before she began. The room was quiet. I opened my binder. Not to the front, to tab 4, which was labeled Conclave Filing Error Inventory. I have 47 items, I said. I'll go through them in the order they appear in the original filing. Advocate Sorveth was still for a moment, a particular kind of still. Item 1, I said, the motions cover document, Form 1C Institutional Challenge Petition. The signatory block requires the full 14-digit organizational code for the filing body. The Veth Conclave's code was entered as 13 digits. The 14th digit was omitted. Standard administrative code requires that incomplete organizational identifiers be flagged for resubmission prior to tribunal acceptance. I looked at Chief Arbiter Melling. The filing, as submitted, is technically incomplete at the first page. I am not moving to dismiss on this basis alone. I am noting it as the first of 47 items. Melling made a note. Item 2, I said. Exhibit 3A, the historical precedent document cited in support of Section 7 of the motion's argument. This exhibit was filed on Form 4H, supporting documentation, historical record. Form 4H was superseded 8 years ago by Form 4H, revised following the Administrative Codification Act of 2847. The current required form is 4H Rev materials filed on a superseded form are not recognized as valid evidentiary exhibits under current tribunal procedure. I turned the page. This eliminates the primary historical precedent underpinning the conclave's Section 7 argument. Murmuring through the observer tier, I continued. I did not rush. I did not perform. I moved through the items the way I had moved through every form I had ever processed, methodically, without emphasis, with the flat accuracy of someone who was simply reading what was there. By item 11, 2 of the conclave's 42 legal team members were quietly reviewing documents at their table. By item 20, 4 more had joined them. By item 32, Advocate Sorvith had sat down, and one of his juniors had taken over at the stand with a look that can only be described as someone attempting to bail water while standing upright on principle. Item 35 eliminated the conclave's secondary evidentiary base entirely. A packet of supporting affidavits, impressively assembled, filed on the correct forms, with the correct signatures, but stamped with a date that post-dated the motion itself. Meaning the affidavits had been collected after the motion was filed, not before, which violated the tribunal's evidence sequencing rule under Section 4 of the Procedural Code. Evidence gathered after the fact, filed as if gathered before, a detail so small that in 42 lawyers and 60 years of combined practice, no one had caught it. I had caught it on page 312 of my reading on the transport to the tribunal station. Melling made a longer note. Item 43 caused what I can only describe as a structural shift in the room. The foundational claim, the core argument that the Academy's mission had deviated in a legally actionable way, relied on enrollment composition data drawn from a Bureau Analytics report. The report was cited correctly. The form was correct. The date was correct. But the data had been pulled from a filtered subset of the enrollment records, not the full data set. The filter parameters had not been disclosed in the filing, as required under tribunal evidentiary disclosure rules. The actual unfiltered enrollment data, I said, which I pulled from the Bureau's public access database, access code on file, shows a mission composition consistent with the founding mandate in 31 of the past 35 years. The 4 outlier years all correspond to specific documented events. A regional conflict requiring rapid tactical training in 2831, a cadet exchange program with 3 partner academies in 2839 through 2841, a deliberate program expansion authorized by the Galactic Educational Council in 2844, and a data classification change in 2847 that retroactively altered how several training categories were recorded without altering the actual training. I set the printout on the table. The deviation the conclave has argued does not exist in the full record. It exists only in the filtered version. The room was quiet in a different way than it had been before. A long quiet, the kind that is weight. Melanie had stopped taking notes and was reading something on her own screen, with the focused attention of someone confirming something they already suspected. I got to item 47. Item 47, I said. The challenge provision itself, Charter Section 14, the provision the conclave has cited as the basis for their motion's admissibility, requires that the filing body demonstrate continuous jurisdictional standing over the institution for a period of not less than 30 years prior to filing. I paused just one beat. The Veth Conclave was formally reconstituted as a legal entity in the Administrative Reform of 2819. Prior to that date, it operated under a different organizational designation with a different administrative code. The current conclave entity has existed for 23 years, not 30. The jurisdictional standing requirement is not met by 7 years. I closed the binder. The motion, I said, cannot stand, not on merit, not on procedure, not on the standing of the filing body. I looked at Chief Arbiter Melling. I have filed a full documentation packet with the tribunal clerk, every citation, Every cross-reference, every supporting form, it is ready for review. I sat down. Melaine looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the conclave's table. Then she looked up at the 3,000 observers in the tiers above, and something crossed her face that she did not attempt to suppress. The very slight elevation of someone watching something that does not happen. She laughed. Not loudly, not for the room. A private sound, a small one that escaped before she decided whether to allow it. By item 47, it had simply surprised it out of her. She composed herself, looked down at the bench. "The tribunal will recess to review the documentation," she said. "We will reconvene in 4 hours." The recess took 2. The motion was dismissed in full, not narrowed, not modified, dismissed. The conclave's filing, its entire architecture, was formally vacated and entered into the tribunal's procedural error record as a reference case. Advocate Sorvith, on his way out past our table, he stopped, did not look at Owen or Vors, looked at me. He did not speak for a long moment. "Then where did you train?" "Waystation Kofi 7, I said. "Bureau Processing Division." He absorbed that. "You did not study law?" "No." "Tribunal procedure." I read the manual on the transport over, and the charter, and the conclave's historical filing record, which is publicly available through the Bureau's Heritage Documentation Archive. I paused. "Also your personal litigation history, 43 prior cases. You have never lost on procedural grounds. I thought that was important context." He was quiet. Then he did something I had not expected. He inclined his head, not a bow, not exactly, but a deliberate downward tilt that carried recognition in it. The kind given between people who understand what a thing cost. He left. Outside the tribunal hall, the station's observation level looked out onto open space. Vors found me there. Owen was behind him, and Oreth after that, and Resk at the end of the line, steady and quiet as always. They arranged themselves beside me without discussion. The stars were right from here. Not Kofi 7 right, not Earth right, but oriented in ways I had learned over months to recognize, the particular shapes of Sector 9 sky that I now knew the names of. Vors stood beside me for a while without speaking. Then, "When they assigned you here, the error, did you know what you were walking into?" "I knew it was Voth Kral," I said. "Did you know about the charter, about what Vekos needed?" "No," I said. "But you came anyway." "I came because the correction form had a 22-month processing window, and I had 19 days. He was quiet. Then, "That is either very brave or very strange." "Both," Owen said. "Definitely both." I looked out at the stars. Vors asked eventually, "Why did you smile on the transport, at intake, through all of it? Why did you keep smiling?" I thought about the desk, the dent in the armrest, my mother's elbow, 31 years of pressing until the material gave. I thought about a Form 77C with a 22-month backlog and a 19-day departure window. I thought about Commandant Vekos, who had read a score field that hadn't been used in 200 years and decided it was enough to bet an academy on. I thought about all the gaps, all the fields no one had filled in, all the forms no one had read all the way to the end. Because terrified and interested feel almost exactly the same, I said, and I have always been more interested than anything else. No one spoke for a while. Then Owen said, "What happens now?" I had already thought about this. Back at Voth Kral, there was a Form 3C waiting to be filed, application for permanent faculty posting. I had drafted it on the transport. Specialty field, administrative combat, which was not a recognized designation in the Bureau's classification system, which meant I would need to file Form 22A, new specialty category registration, concurrently, which would require supporting documentation from the Academy administration and a written justification of minimum 400 words. I had already written the justification. I had written it on the return leg from the tribunal, on a notepad, in the window seat, with the wrong stars going past outside and Vors asleep across the aisle and Owen, annotating his own copy of the Rival Charter in 3 different colors. The galaxy ran on paperwork. It had always run on paperwork. Every war, every treaty, every decommission and every construction tender and every enrollment flag, all of it lived in forms, in fields, in the gaps between what was written and what was meant. Most people learned to navigate the galaxy. I had learned to navigate its filing system. Those were not the same skill. And somewhere in the difference between them was the thing I had been, without knowing it, my entire life. I turned away from the stars. "I have some forms to file," I said. "Shall we go?" We went.